BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, island life from the animals.
I think to lose Guernsey cows from Guernsey would be an absolute travesty. This extra funding will provide that stability to the industry to be able to, and the confidence to move forward into the future.
To the challenges of finding a home.
The first day when we got the keys, 2 glasses and a bottle of Prosecco, and I just sat on the floor and cried for about 3 hours. I couldn't articulate the feelings I was feeling of, for the first time, having somewhere that was mine and that no one could take away from me.
And Trump's tariffs.
This is going to significantly impact agri-food trade. We're looking at a complete disruption of global supply chains. It will affect everyone around the globe.
More on that later. First, firefighters are warning of the extreme risk of wildfires in Scotland. This week, the fire service issued its third warning this year after fires in hills near Glasgow and also in Aberdeenshire. It says after a spell of warm weather, there is plenty of dry vegetation which can act as fuel for fires, and it's urging people not to light fires outside. Group Commander Gary Douglas is from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service.
So wildfires can start naturally through different things, obviously lightning strikes, other things, but the biggest cause of wildfires is human behaviour. So that could be carelessly disposed cigarettes, could be something as simple as a spark from machinery, and it can also be something like a piece of glass that gets magnified with the sunlight, and this can lead to an ignition source.
So I guess the Easter holidays are a bit of a worry, particularly because we've got good weather.
Absolutely. The good weather's fantastic and it's great for people to get outside and enjoy the countryside, but this does bring with it a high risk of people then lighting campfires.
Of course, for them to really go, they need to get that dry vegetation which acts as a fuel. Should more areas be cleared to try and prevent that?
In terms of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, we visited Catalonia where we worked with their fire service, and they do actually what we call prescribed burning, and that's something that we're looking to utilise within part of our tools for as a preventative measure. So to look at areas that are hotspots for wildfires and take away that fuel source before the fire starts.
It doesn't feel like it's been a particularly dry autumn and winter. Why are things so dry after just a bit of warm weather?
I think there is a common misconception that we'd get these sort of fires in the middle of summer when we've got really high temperatures. So this time of year is ideal conditions for a wildfire for a number of factors. So at this time of year, we don't have lush green grass or leaves within the trees. So what happens is you get that rain coming through, we get ground saturated. But what happens is we do get those ground frosts, and those are perfect conditions for drying out these sticks and other fuel sources. And then what happens is we get a slight rise in temperature and we get that wind coming from a certain direction, which especially up the west coast of Scotland, that creates perfect conditions for a wildfire to then start and also spread. And it's just this time of year. So generally wildfire season will go from start of March up until the end of May, sometimes into June.
We saw when we had wildfires in California earlier in the year just how unpredictable they are. Are they harder than other fires to fight?
They are absolutely unpredictable, and yes, in terms of fighting them, if you get a large wildfire, what can happen is it can create its own weather system within the actual wildfire, so it can whip up winds, which you saw in California, which were well over 100 miles per hour, and this can make the speed that the wildfire travels across the ground so unpredictable and so dangerous for us to put firefighters in there to actually tackle it. We're putting people's lives at risk. So we really need to try and get an understanding of which direction that fire's going, but that can just change at such a fast pace that it's very hard for us to keep ahead of.
Gary Douglas from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Now to island life, which is what we looked at all week on Farming Today. That's the programme which goes out every weekday morning here on BBC Radio 4 at 5:45, or available at a more social time on BBC Sounds. Well, on Guernsey, the dairy industry is going through a tough time. Rising costs have driven profits down, and farmers have welcomed the news that they're to receive more support from the island's government. Chris Ledyard reports.
Hello. They're beautiful, aren't they?
I mean, we've got such a range in here at the moment. We've got brown ones, we've got white ones, we've got browny white ones, we've got light ones and dark ones, red ones. It's a multitude of different colours, which actually gives them that unique characteristic because you know immediately who it is.
Tucked away among narrow lanes in the parish of St Saviour, a herd of 100 or so Guernsey cows belonging to Michael Bray.
My bug for the land came from my dad, really, and I used to...
Michael grew up in Guernsey. His parents were in horticulture, first tomatoes, then flowers. From a young age, he wanted to farm.
We then went camping in Herm, a small island off Guernsey, where there was a small dairy herd there, and I got helping there over the summers and got the bug for Guernsey cows, really.
After working in England and New Zealand, Michael came back to Guernsey, where he's now president of the Guernsey Farmers Association. So when you came back 12, 13 years ago, how many dairy farmers were there here then?
There was 18 dairy farmers then. We're down to 11 now. And inevitably, we're probably going to lose another couple of farms. So I think, as farmers decide to retire, whether there's somebody wanting to take it on is the big question.
Michael's costs are high. For example, he says shipping feed to the island costs him an extra £100 a tonne. And the industry's been struggling. A report for the island's government says that in recent years, Guernsey dairy farmers have had access to far less financial support than farmers in Jersey, the Isle of Man or the UK.
I'm Deputy Lindsay de Summers and I'm the President of the Committee for the Environment and Infrastructure, which has in its mandate, among other things, agriculture.
And Lindsay, your committee's decided that basically dairy farming in Guernsey needs more public money.
Yeah, I mean, really, the fundamental principle is public money for public goods.
And soon after we met at Les Jarnets Farm, the States of Guernsey voted to more than double that public money, from £1 million a year to £2.35 million, to try to reinvigorate the island's dairy industry.
Guernsey is such a beautiful island, and so much of its charm and character is really shaped by our rural landscape. And really, we've got our farmers to thank for that, because they are the custodians of our countryside.
I think to lose Guernsey cows from Guernsey would be an absolute travesty. This extra funding will provide that stability to the industry to be able to, and the confidence to be able to move forward and into the next generation and into the future.
And let's talk about that Guernsey countryside that you're part of. Very small fields, measured in verges, the local measurement, which is roughly just under half an acre, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sort of multiple ownership as well, is that right? That you find yourself not as a tenant, not with one landlord or two landlords, but you can have multiple landlords.
Hundreds,
Hundreds, really? Hundreds?
Yeah. It was from the Norman times when they were all split up and divided, which, we want to protect that because those hedgerows and stone walls have been there for multiple generations kind of thing. So.
And just to add to what Michael said, those earth banks, hedgerows are absolutely packed with biodiversity, and so they are so valuable from a natural environment perspective. And that's one of the things why it's important that we can support farmers to support our natural wildlife.
Lindsay de Summers ending that report from Guernsey. Well, ferries are important for all islanders, of course, but for crofters in Scotland who have livestock to buy and sell, ferry services are an essential part of their farming business. Nancy Nicholson's been to the island of Lewis on the west coast.
It's early morning and I'm just driving onto the Loch Seaforth, the ferry, bound for the Western Isles. And that's us underway. Crossing the Minch to Stornoway takes about 2.5 hours.
Throw it.
We'll shut the gate. Just wandering into this field on the west side of Lewis with Ali Williamson, and you've got a big heavy bag on your back.
The morning feed for the ewes, and these ewes are due to lamb from about the 5th of April, so not long now.
And you've got sheep across Lewis and Harris, haven't you? How many do you have?
We're running in the region of about 700.
One of the challenges, of course, of living on an island, farming on an island, is transport and getting the stock from one side of the Minch to the other, and you need the ferries.
Everything depends on the ferries, really. All our goods coming in, whether that be our feed supplies or our food for ourselves. We choose to be on this island, but the vast majority of our markets are on the mainland. We're at the mercy of the weather at all points. With the way the ferries are operated and the rule that they have at the moment, we're at the captain's discretion to take the livestock or not. It seems to be the case that one captain one day will take them and the same weather could be the next day and the next captain won't. So the consistency of it is very frustrating.
Is it because of the balance for the animals? Is that the issue?
Horses are treated the same as sheep. Now, obviously a sheep in a trailer box in the bottom of the deck is far more stable than maybe a horse is. Sometimes if we're thinking about shows or sales, it's months, sometimes even years of planning goes into these things. And when you've got the animal and you want to show it or sell it, and then it's left to someone else to make that decision whether your plans can come to fruition or not, it's extremely frustrating. All we ask for is consistency and some better form of communication between the port and either the livestock market or those who are intending travelling with livestock. Everything should be as safe as possible, but it comes to the safety of the animals. That onus, I believe, should probably be passed on to the owner, i.e. me, and then I should be asked whether I sign something to say, yes, I'm happy to take that. Then I believe that 95% of livestock holders would actually do that.
What happens if you're stuck on the wrong side of the minge?
It can be a welfare issue for the livestock because you've travelled however far you've travelled to get to your destination, and then to be told, no, you're not coming on the ferry today. You've then got to realise that you've got to get these animals off as quick as possible in a place that you're not familiar with, where you know nobody. More often than not, because of where we are, if we're stuck on the Ullapool side, you're having to go all the way back to Dingwall and hope that you can find some sort of place for them there.
Grazing or
something.
Yeah.
Now, we have the largest vessel, the Loch Seaforth. We're very lucky, but if you look at the likes of Loch Boysdale, their community's been decimated by the ferry service. The scrutiny on it needs to be heavier because of how vital it actually is. And we need to have, again, a consistent approach as to why these boats are not providing the service that they're obliged to serve us with.
Well, we did ask to speak to somebody from Calmac Ferries. No one was available, but in a statement they told us, we work closely with hauliers, mart auctioneers and NFU Scotland to ensure that feed, equipment and livestock are transported safely, timely and efficiently. Captains are legally required to make sure that customers, crew and cargo, including livestock, are safe and don't suffer during passage. They use multiple sources of data to determine whether adverse weather during the journey will result in unsafe conditions, and we support their judgment to make these decisions on a case-by-case basis. Well, finding an island home can be a challenge, especially for young people. A recent survey found housing, or a lack of it, was the biggest concern for young people in Scotland's islands. Richard Baines has been hearing from one woman who spent more than 10 years without a proper home. But first he spoke to a teenager who fears for the future.
We were trying to find a house for about 6 years.
This 14-year-old lives on Tiree, an island 50 miles west of Oban, in the Sea of the Hebrides.
When we were saying, look, we're not going to have a home in this many weeks, the only option was to go to Loch Ilped, over 100 miles away from Tiree.
A large part of the problem is that almost half of Tiree's houses are holiday accommodation. High building costs and a shortage of house sites can also be problems on the islands.
We finally have a permanent home, which I have no intention of moving out of anytime soon. But in the future, if I was thinking I'd want to find someone to rent on Tiree, right now there isn't anywhere.
The survey was carried out by Scotland's Young Islanders Network. It found that 72% of the young responders think that they'll need to leave their island homes when they're older due to a lack of housing. The Tiree resident who took part in the survey hopes the report based on it will prompt action.
The Young Islanders Network housing report is really brought to light. It's like, we're the youngest generation, we're looking at the islands and we're thinking we're not going to have a house.
One of the first big purchases that we made was a bean-to-cup coffee machine.
Here on Colonsay, south and east of Tiree, Caitlin McNeil moved into this comfortable, newly built home just before Christmas.
I've never had a fridge this big in my life, and I've never had one this full, because I've never had a fridge and money at the same time, which is really exciting. My granny kindly got us a matching kettle and a toaster set for when we moved in.
This well-equipped kitchen was something the 31-year-old could only dream of for the past few years.
I've known the stress of housing insecurity my entire adult life. The whole of my 20s was spent ricocheting between caravans and sort of stays in my parents' house, or worse, caravans, or when second homeowners might be kind enough to let me stay in their house over the winter. It was about 17 times that I moved over the course of my 20s, and that included 2 major stints on the mainland. It did essentially drive me and my brother off the island at different points. The first day when we got the keys, 2 glasses and a bottle of Prosecco, and I just sat on the floor and cried for about 3 hours. I couldn't articulate the feelings I was feeling of for the first time having somewhere that was mine and that no one could take away from me.
People simply couldn't afford to get into buying their own homes. There weren't any for rent because more than half the properties here are either second homes or holiday rentals.
Callum Hay is a director of the Colonsay Community Development Company, a charity set up to improve life on the island. The company pulled together funding and help from Highlands and Islands Enterprise, Argyll and Bute Council and others to build the £3.5 million housing scheme where Caitlin now lives. It has 9 houses. 3 are staff accommodation paid for by the local fish farm firm. 2 houses are for sale under a shared ownership scheme, and 4, including Caitlin's, are to let for affordable rents. Is this kind of project a solution for other similar communities, rural communities, island communities?
It's certainly a solution. Whether or not it's the right solution, it's incredibly hard work. It can get pretty heavy going. If any other communities are thinking of doing this, you need to be ready for that. But this seems to be one of the only ways that we could get this particular kind of development off the ground here on Colonsay.
Callum Hay ending that report from Richard Baines. Now, this week, President Trump's announcement of sweeping new tariffs on goods entering the United States from around the world caused chaos in international markets. And farmers and producers have been trying to work out what it'll mean for them. Well, starting today, the UK faces tariffs of 10% on all exports to the States. For others, it's higher. The EU faces tariffs of 20%, and all Chinese exports to the USA will now face tariffs of 54%. Here's President Trump speaking from the White House Rose Garden on Wednesday.
American steel workers, auto workers, farmers, and skilled craftsmen, we have a lot of them here with us today. They really suffered gravely. They watched in anguish as foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream.
Well, the UK Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Jonathan Reynolds, made a statement in the House of Commons on Thursday.
It remains our belief that the best route to economic stability for working people is a negotiated deal with the US that builds on our shared strengths. However, we do reserve the right to take any action we deem necessary if a deal is not secured. To enable the UK to have every option open to us in future, I am today launching a request for input on the implications for British businesses of possible retaliatory action. This is a formal step necessary for us to keep all options on the table. We will seek the views of UK stakeholders over 4 weeks until the 1st of May 2025 on products that could potentially be included in any UK tariff response. This exercise will also give businesses the chance to have their say and influence the design of any possible UK action.
Jonathan Reynolds. So what does all this mean for UK farmers and food producers? Well, the US is the 3rd largest export market for UK farmers after Ireland and France. That's according to the most recent figures from DEFRA. On average, we sell £68 million worth of cheese and £23 million worth of pork, along with around £3 million worth of beef to the States every year. But one of the biggest food exports to the US is salmon, and the US is the UK's 2nd most valuable export market for the fish. Tavish Scott is Chief Executive of Salmon Scotland.
The salmon sector exports £225 million worth of salmon from the UK into the USA every year. So any disruption to trade creates some business uncertainty. What we need from the UK government is a longer-term trade and economic arrangement that would be in the interests of the UK economy and very much in the interests of all the people who work in our sector across Scotland.
Giles Barber is Managing Director at Barber's Group in Somerset, the UK's largest exporter of cheese. He says they've had to deal with this kind of thing before.
We've got some experience of additional tariffs as recently back as sort of 2019, and that lasted for over a year. So we have some sales data that we've been leaning on to try and work out what might happen next. Last time we saw an immediate impact on certain products of possibly up to 50%. But within a year, demand for most of our products in the US had recovered to previous levels. So there's a lot of disruption up front. And I would anticipate this time around where there's probably a bigger hit to the US consumer generally because of the worldwide application of tariffs, there may be a bigger impact relative to the size of the tariff.
American producers are going to be affected too. Chad Frank from Wyoming is the president of the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union.
The biggest effect for farmers and ranchers is the continued uncertainty. About 20% of U.S. products in the ag market are exported. By increasing these tariffs, we're going to have trouble getting those products moved. That's going to cause disruptions in our markets when we go to sell. There's going to be excess product on the market, likely going to drive prices down, maybe significantly. And farmers can't really pivot and change their plans very quickly. The planning happens years in advance, and it's really difficult to change quickly. And since these tariffs are so widespread, there's really no product to switch your production to. It's just going to affect everything.
Chad Frank from the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union there. Kaz Graham's been speaking to Maria Gonzalez, the international trade editor at The Grocer magazine, about the impact these new tariffs could have on global food markets and UK farmers.
Essentially, the tariff is absorbed by the U.S. importer, right? But they may decide to pass those costs down the supply chain to their exporter, or they may decide to trade less with UK producers, or even that it's not worth to trade at all. So we could potentially see a decrease in UK exports to the US as a result of these tariffs, or it may just become more expensive to trade with US partners.
And if we take a more global perspective, what are the main agri-food products that the US imports from around the world? What do they import and where do they import it from?
Yeah, so the US actually does import a lot of agricultural goods. So beef, pork, dairy, cheese, and other cheese sort of related products. And it is importing a lot of this stuff from Canada, Mexico, the EU, particularly the UK as well as Australia and New Zealand. And it does also import a lot of soy from China. So all of these trade routes may be affected.
The US has been importing a lot of beef. I mean, it imports from a number of countries, including Australia, New Zealand. If the US isn't buying that beef anymore, is there a risk that it will be, dumped on UK markets?
It's worth bearing in mind that New Zealand and Australia are already huge exporters of beef and other types of meat to the UK. So it may well be that they'll try to kind of ramp up their export levels here. But also, as we know, the farming community in the UK is quite sensitive to that, as they don't want beef from New Zealand and Australia to flood the markets at a more competitive price. We'll have to see how that goes, but it is possible that may happen.
And do you think that some producers might actually have an advantage? I mean, for example, Norway now has a higher tariff than Scotland. It's at 16%. Scottish salmon farmers will perhaps have an advantage here then.
Yeah, they will perhaps have an advantage. So you could look, for instance, at cheese. The EU is the top exporter of cheese to the US. And now that it's facing higher tariff rates, it could be that, US importers will be looking into buying more from the UK or from another top partner like Canada, which has been exempt from tariffs this time around. However, it is worth remembering that tariffs are bad for everyone. Tariffs are bad for business in general. So even though they will have a little bit more of an advantage, we're still talking really increased costs all throughout the supply chain.
OK, Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, announced a consultation into possible retaliatory measures against the US if a future trade deal doesn't happen. I mean, what food do we import from the US that could have tariffs on it increased? How could it affect us here?
Yeah, the UK does import some food products from the US. We're talking meat, wine and other distilled spirits, as well as soybeans. And it could just well be that, the UK will have to look to sourcing elsewhere.
OK, it's very, very early days for these tariffs. But how big are the repercussions going to be around the world when it comes to agri-food trade?
This is going to significantly impact agri-food trade. We're looking at a complete disruption of global supply chains. This is one of the biggest rewrites of US trade policy in decades. It will affect everyone around the globe. And you'll see businesses now look at their supply chains, talk to their logistics partners, their suppliers, and it is quite likely that you'll see a complete rerouting of supply chains across the world.
Maria Gonçalves, international trade editor at The Grocer. More on trade deals and tariffs next week. But that's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Rebecca Rooney, and Farming Today this week is a BBC Audio Bristol production.